Welcome everybody to our Survey Like a Pro webinar series. In this series of webinars, we're following data from the point of capture, going through collaborating between the field and the office to verify your data, running reports in Survey Manager and PCS, and ultimately exporting and sharing data with other systems. The last session in the series will be delivered at our users group in Austin, Texas this October. In the second session, we'll cover survey data cleanup and collaboration from the field to the office. We'll send out a link to the recording of the session in a few days so you can refer to it at any time or send it to any colleagues who may have missed it. To register for the remaining two sessions, just head over to our website, aiworldwide.com. Remember, if you attend all 4 sessions, including the one at Users Group, we'll send you an American Innovations hat. For those of you I haven't met, I'm David Gaucher, Product Manager for PCS and Survey Manager. First, a little housekeeping. Please submit any questions that you have during the webinar at any time using the questions panel, and we'll answer them at the end. If we don't get to your question, I'll follow up with you via email. First, a quick recap of our first webinar in the series, which is on our YouTube channel in case you want to watch it, in case you missed it. Lon Duke, seen here in his natural habitat, went over some pre-assessment items that'll help you before doing your CI survey. Things like knowing information about the pipeline itself, like the type of coating that's on the pipeline, when it was installed, soil condition, information about your current sources on the pipeline, so if there are any rectifiers or galvanic anodes, or if you have any critical bonds, and any operational data you may have, such as the construction history of the pipeline or historical data. He went over the right way to set up your Allegro, including some tips to stop your survey wire from breaking, highlighted some lesser known but critically important features, some of which we're going to talk about again today in Survey Manager. And he went over best practices for troubleshooting your survey while you're in the field. So now that our CI survey is complete, we need to verify the data from that survey for accuracy. This step is crucial for any survey, but especially for close interval surveys, because the data that comes out of these surveys is often a key component in the decision about if and where to dig up your pipeline. It's imperative that the data that we're gathering in the field is as accurate as possible, so you don't spend unnecessary money digging up your pipe in the wrong spots. We recently had a white paper published to Materials Performance Magazine talking about things to look for when dealing with large data sets like close interval surveys. Be sure to check it out. You can download the paper titled Data Quality Management, Mitigating Data Corrosion in the Age of Big Data Analytics from Materials Performance websites. It's materialsperformance.com/whitepapers. Okay, so we need to verify the data, and the best spot to do that is going to be with Survey Manager. So Survey Manager really shines in helping uncover areas where your surveys need a little attention. This cloud-based application lives between the field and the office, and it helps you easily identify and correct issues with your surveys so you can feel confident that the data you're producing is ready to be stored in your database of record. And then, use it to make business decisions like where to dig up your pipe, or if you need to, if you don't need to. The first thing that I wanted to mention here is workflow, and that's something that this slide here shows. There's really a couple main scenarios we tend to see with our Survey Manager customers, and I want to walk through a couple of those here. So one is that a survey company performs all of the work, from conducting the survey to cleaning up the survey, and then they hand the completed survey over to an operator, with a detailed report with their recommendations, including a chart and a map, all of the readings that they took, and typically those readings are going to be in bridgeable files or files that are easy to import into PCS, which is something that we're going to get into in the third installment of this series. The other use case is that an operator and a survey company collaborate using the same survey manager site to verify the readings together. So if we just take this workflow, for example, working from the left to the right, the first webinar that we did was about these tips and tricks to gather the most accurate close interval survey data, do it efficiently, and that's what's happening with this field tech. They're using an Allegro with the integrated DVM. Once they've taken their day plots, typically these surveys are going to be done, especially for long run pipelines. You'll have multiple days of close interval surveys that are done, and they need to be loaded into a place so that they can be aligned. Usually, when we're talking survey companies, that means you're trying to align the survey that you're doing in the field with alignment sheets that are coming from the operator that you're working for. Survey Manager does a great job of that, and we'll talk about that once we get into the live demo portion of the presentation. But the space that we're going to be in today is the field tech taking his day plot, loading it into Survey Manager, and immediately getting context from Survey Manager about potential things that could be wrong with the survey. And it's not just a field tech that is doing this in isolation. If a supervisor is also connected to the same site, they can kind of act as the eye in the sky, or if you have someone in the office who's really good at analyzing surveys, they can look at the exact same data and help uncover some of the issues and collaborate with the field while a crew is still on site to correct the problem. If it, like for example, if something needs to be resurveyed, you can identify those problems while the crew is in the field, and that's ultimately going to save you as a survey company money, because a lot of times you're doing these jobs, they're fixed bid jobs, and so the goal is to do them as quick as possible. It's going to cost a lot of money to complete your survey for a day and then go back to a hotel only to realize that you have to go back to the same spot that you're at the end of the day or earlier in your survey to go and resurvey something. So it really improves that efficiency from the survey company perspective. And then ultimately, once the survey has been verified, you can see that on the far right there, we're pushing it to reports in Survey Manager, or we're pushing it to PCS so that it can be used. That data can be used in PCS and overlaid with other types of data sets, or eventually pushed to other systems. That's kind of the idea as far as the workflow goes. For a survey company, it's totally self-contained. When we start talking about operators as well, there's a couple different scenarios that we typically see whenever an operator and a survey company are collaborating on the same site. Typically, it's going to be the survey company allows an operator to look at the survey company's Survey Manager site. So as these surveys are coming in, they're being cleaned up, an operator could have read-only access and see surveys that have been deemed ready to share with the operator so that they could quickly see what's going on with their CI surveys, how progress is coming along, quickly see any problems that may be occurring, and provide some insight in case the crews need to go out and troubleshoot something. The kind of other side of the token is if an operator owns Survey Manager, they could grant access to a field tech to upload these surveys. And in that case, the operator typically is going to be the one that's going to be helping these field crews verify that the data is accurate and complete before bringing it into their database of record, which is PCS in most cases. So just a quick rundown about the workflow. Let's dig into Survey Manager itself now and try and figure out how we can use the context that Survey Manager provides and the tools that Survey Manager provides to make sure that the data that you're gathering in the field is accurate and verifiable and trustworthy and ready to be used to make business decisions. That's really the ultimate goal here. All right, so this is Survey Manager. For those of you that haven't seen it before, it's a cloud-based application. So you just log in with your credentials, and you can get to it if you have internet access anywhere. Kind of different than the way we deploy PCS, where there's a server in your network that lives in your network, and you share data back and forth. This is just logging into a web page, so all the data is contained on a website. It makes for low bandwidth access. The performance is totally it's totally designed for low bandwidth access. Some of the things that I'm going to be going over are some of the newer enhancements that we have released this year. We're we have an update cycle of about a month, 4 to 6 weeks. So every 4 to 6 weeks, we're updating new versions of Survey Manager with new features and ideas that you guys have submitted to us. And the feedback that we get from y'all is super critical to us making good product. So I appreciate all the feedback that you guys have been giving about Survey Manager and our other products as well. If you have an idea that comes up, how we can make Survey Manager better during this webinar, or an idea about a different product, we have a portal that you can go to, ideas.aiworldwide.com, where you can log in and submit your idea. And the product management team, which I'm a part of at American Innovations, we review all those ideas and comment on them if we need to get some additional information, and ultimately, use those ideas to help us figure out the types of things that we should be including in future releases of our products. So definitely keep up, sending us more ideas. There's also a space in the ideas portal where you can vote on those ideas. The more votes, the higher the likelihood it's going to be included. You can make comments as well if you want to ask clarifying questions. So, definitely make your voice heard using our ideas portal. We take all of that information really seriously. Enough about the ideas portal. So back to Survey Manager. What you can see here is a bunch of stuff. So we have the map, we have the chart, we have the table, and really the goal of this is to equip you guys with tools that would help you clean up your survey. And there are lots of tools that will help you do that in Survey Manager, but it's a lot more than just using a tool to find an undetected skip or where it's overlapped or looking for spikes, which we're going to talk about all those things. The value that Survey brings to the table is that we're keeping all of your data in context with these 3 elements. So just kind of running through each of them. At the bottom here, we have a table. Y'all should all be familiar with tables. It looks like an Excel spreadsheet or the PCS data grid. It's a super valuable tool when looking at data because it can let you, sort and filter and get down to these specific data points that you need to go and investigate. It's really good at doing that. What it's really not good at is aggregating all of this data and figuring out where you might have trends. These CI surveys can be hundreds of thousands of records sometimes, especially if we're talking about a continuous pipeline that's running, hundreds of miles, and you have close interval surveys throughout the whole thing. It's really difficult to go in and look at a table and figure out where something, maybe there was a problem with hitting a rock when you were taking a reading, or maybe the readings that you see are emblematic of a larger problem. So there are some good things about a table. There's also some challenges that are associated with it. Charts are also super helpful at giving you that context that a table lacks. So I can quickly see how my survey is trending over distance. That's what our x-axis is here. And I can see, maybe I have some spikes that might need to be cleaned up, but I could also see where there are major shifts occurring, like in my on reading right here, how I go from much lower potential to a higher potential. It would be really hard to see that shift and see that it's maintained throughout the rest of the survey if you're just looking at a table. So really great at taking that information and aggregating it into a single spot so that you can see trends over the course of your entire survey, but it doesn't complete the whole picture. You know, I don't know why this went up, you know, maybe 100 millivolts or however much it did, or when I have this gap right here, I don't really know why there is a gap there just by looking at a chart. Now, we do have comments down here in the bottom section, and you can, you know, click on them to see what all the comments are. Sometimes the comments are going to tell you that additional information that you need, but sometimes they're not. Maybe the field guys didn't notice that, you know, your potential readings are going up by 100 millivolts, and they just kept surveying. So really, that's kind of where a map comes into play. Maps can give you that context that a chart lacks, because we can go in and identify geographic features that may be influencing your surveys. So for example, if we just kind of zoom into this gap here, we can see that as I'm dragging my cursor over my chart, it's following it alongside in the map. And then as I get over to the other side, you can see that there's some overlap between these two surveys here. So before I did anything to this survey, Survey Manager, whenever you load these surveys in, Survey Manager is taking this data and it's already providing you areas where you may need to do some looking. In this case, where you have unended skips, or this is actually where surveys are overlapping, that is indicated to you on the chart with this gap. And even when you're zoomed out all the way, you can clearly see that there's a pretty big gap there, and something is likely wrong that you may need to investigate. So in this case, the surveys are overlapped, and there's a tool in here which we'll get to later that's going to help us splice these surveys together. But I just want to kind of take a step back and talk about how we got here, and the things that Survey Manager is doing to the survey whenever you're importing it. So this is one of those new features. If we come over here to the sidebar on the left and we click the add button, I'll pick today's date and my name, just some required fields that talk about this maps to the start date in PCS, and then technician is always really helpful metadata to be tracking on really any surveys that you're doing. But when I come in here to load a file, and I have a couple here that are ready to go. Before, when you were loading a file, you couldn't, in a really easy way, upload Excel files. So historically with Survey Manager, the main file types that we supported were the SVY and the DVG. Those come straight from the Allegro. They're in very specific formats that Survey Manager and PCS can consume. But when you're taking data from another system, be it GIS or you know, risk management or PCS, you're not going to get an export in those formats. These are proprietary file type formats that are very specific to the Allegro. So one of the things that we did this year is allow you to import a flat file with column headers, really similar to the bridge. For those of you that are familiar with the bridge in PCS, how you can take, you know, an Excel file that has that first row being your column header, and then below that you just have rows and rows and rows of data. So that's the format that we're looking for here. And you can import those files into Survey Manager as well. So this should look really familiar to PCS users that are familiar with the bridge, where we have our column headers on the left here. And then we also have on the far right here, these are the fields in Survey Manager that you could map these columns to. But we actually took it a step further. So you can see here that we had some fields that are automatically mapped. And this survey file is something that I've never loaded before. But what Survey Manager does is anytime you have an Excel column that has, we retain that column header and what field you had mapped it to. So for example, anytime I load a file, that has station as a column header, it's going to automatically try and map station to the station number field. The same thing goes for all of these fields. So we're gonna retain that information for future files, but invariably, which we'll talk about this a little bit later when we get to icons as well, you're going to have different column headers. Maybe you are an operator and you work for, or you're employing a couple survey companies that call your comments remarks, or survey remarks, or comments, or survey comments. There's a million different variables of these column headers that you could potentially see when you're loading these files. Survey Manager is going to retain every single one of them so that future files that you bring in are going to auto map. So it kind of takes the auto map feature from the PCS bridge, where if the column header in your Excel file with no spaces or special characters matches exactly to the PCS field name, it auto maps it. So we took that a step further, and now we're remembering the column mappings that you guys have used in the past. So makes this process a whole lot easier. Eventually, you're not really going to have to matter. You're not even going to have to think about the column headers. You just need to make sure it's in the right format. Survey Manager is going to remember which column headers go to which fields, and you can just click align and you're good. So if you need to align, like survey remarks here, this Survey Manager site had never seen survey remarks as a column header. All you do is click and drag, and that now assigns survey remarks to comments. So any survey going forward would see that and then pick that up. If I were to submit, that would load the data, and what it would do is it's not just loading the data and displaying it on the map. It's doing a bunch of things here. It's identifying where you might have some unended skips, and it's going to call that information out. We're also taking things like in the survey remarks, we're looking for specific keywords. And those keywords are used to parse your comments out into icons on the chart. So I'm just going to cancel this here. These little numbered boxes here at the bottom are for those icons. And if we zoom into one, you can see some of them are just information. Others are indications that there's a line marker, there's aerial markers, just really common features that you're going to run into in pipeline. It's sometimes easier to visualize that information rather than reading these words, but this really lines up with one of the things that Lon brought up in his presentation last month about going in and customizing that pick list, if you will, on the Allegro for the comments that you're going to run into, or rather the features that you're going to run into, and making sure that your comment list on the Allegro is set up in an efficient way for you to quickly enter things like depth of cover, or where you have a road crossing, or you get to a test station, things like that. So we're very aware that, if we take the same idea that I might have flat files that have different column headers, probably, when I have a different Allegro, the keyword on that Allegro, or the keyword that is coming from that pick list, might be different from Allegro to Allegro, or survey company to survey company. One company might call it depth of cover, one company might call it depth, one might call it DOC. All of those are depth of cover, and all of those are really important when we're looking at these CI surveys, which you can see actually we're parsing depth of cover out into this bar chart here at the bottom. But because we know there's so much variance in survey techniques, we are allowing for you to use different comments, and it's still going to render the same icon on the map. So that's great and all. If there are any admin here on the webinar right now, you might be wondering, like, okay, what if somebody accidentally flips the on and the off readings? How do I clean that up? We have a couple of tools specifically for admin. So a manager, a user, or read-only won't see these when they look at their user menu here. But there's column maps. This tool would let you go in here and see all of the different maps that you have specific to a survey type and a field type, so you can see that anytime I'm uploading a close interval survey, if there is an on reading or structure on, it's going to automatically map that field to on. And I could go in, and if something was mismapped, I could just close it out and hit save and close. Now the next time Survey Manager sees an Excel file with structure on in the column header, it's going to allow me to map that to whatever field I want to, and then that mapping would be saved going forward. With the icon maps, I can go in and specify multiple keywords for the same comment. So this was the example I gave, depth, DOC, depth of cover. I could double click in here and add other ones if I want to, like if I wanted to say Dave actually means depth of cover, I could do that and hit save. Now anytime in the remarks of my survey, if it says Dave and then space and a number, it's going to recognize that as depth of cover, and it's going to parse that out and show me an icon, and also update my depth of cover chart. And then of course you can remove mappings as well. So that's one of the new things that we added here. You can see that something that's a little unique to Survey Manager is that we have multiple different mileposts or station numbers, if you will. And really the one that I want to talk about here is measure. And this is something that's really unique to Survey Manager, and it adds a lot of value. So the station number comes straight from the survey file. You can see this one, we're just incrementing by a foot. Every reading that they're taking is going up by a foot, and that happens until the end of the survey. Well, the measure is actually taking the latitude and longitude that are contained in your closed interval survey, which Lon mentioned in the first presentation that you should always be gathering latitude and longitude. This is one of the examples why you always want to gather it, so we can plot that information on a map. But what the measure is doing is it's actually looking at each individual reading, and it's figuring out, okay, if you started at 0 for your beginning of your close interval survey, what's the distance between each point? And it adds that based on your latitude and longitude to give you a much more accurate measure of what actually occurred whenever the survey was done. Definitely a really big value. We use this measure when we're overlaying surveys to show things like what your on and off looks like versus your dipole surveys with respect to calculating 100 millivolt shift, or where your DCVG indications line up with the rest of the indirect surveys that you've been performing. Super valuable tool to have. We're not going to get into how to do these overlays or how to run the reports this presentation. We're going to save that for next presentation because there's a whole lot of information there as well. So back to just kind of focusing on the tools here. Let's talk about this gap that we have here. So this is something that we need to clean up. I'll zoom in on it again so we can just look at it and see that we have this overlap. There's a tool in Survey Manager called Splice, and splicing would let you take the readings from one close interval survey and then actually overwrite the readings in the overlapping survey. And so really the first decision you have to make is which readings you want to keep. Both of these they're pretty much the same, so in my eyes it really doesn't matter too much. What I'm going to do is just come here and pick survey, and now I have this new icon. Once I went down and picked the overlapping survey, this little circle with the half full, half empty, and I want to open the splice tool. So it's going to recognize that there's some overlap in the surveys. If I pick the right one, to be this guy. And so if I get down to the end here, I can see that if you look at the map on the top section and the bottom section, as I'm moving the mouse, they are both moving. So that's where my overlap is. The way it's going to work is it's going to take the readings from this bottom survey and actually override the ones in the top survey. And I'll just go ahead and hit splice here, It's going to refresh my survey for me. Now that gap that was there is gone. And if I go and zoom in a little bit, I can see that there's no more overlap. So any of these changes as well that are made with any of the tools in Survey Manager, they don't remove the history records or the change history of the record. So they're just soft deleted. We're not gonna, if someone goes in and actually, changes comments, we're gonna retain what the old value is and show you the new value. Really similar to PCS. Super helpful when we're talking about following audit trails in case you need to go down that path for whatever reason. Definitely, if you have some overlap, though, use the splice tool. Just the main thing to remember there is that the second survey that you choose when you're splicing surveys is the one that the readings will overwrite the first survey. So just keep that in mind there. Okay, so there's also things like, let me just actually zoom out here. When I drag my mouse across this chart, you can see that it's going north to south as I go left to right. Well, if I wanted to change that, maybe my pipeline actually goes south to north. All I could do is come over here and flip these little arrows. So these allow you to flip the where the readings are showing up in your table and on the chart and on the map, so that you could just flip all three of them and easily go through and have your survey go from south to the north. I could also do things like click and drag to reorder the surveys. So if we just use that as an example here, this is going to throw off my chart big time, because Survey Manager is recognizing that these surveys are out of order. So as I go, my first segment is in the middle, pretty clear something is wrong there, and then it goes to the one on top and then the one on the bottom. Super easy to change that back. And when you're loading multiple files, Survey Manager about 90% of the time is going to get the order of the surveys right and the direction of the surveys right as well. There may be cases where you drop two CI crews on a pipeline. One of them is going south to north, the other is going north to south. So whenever you get those readings back, you have to flip one of them to make it a continuous survey. And you can use the reverse tool, and you can change the order of these surveys really easily to get it in the exact format that you want, that lines up with, if you're a survey company, what the operators are looking for. If you're an operator, maybe you need to get it to line up with what your other systems have as far as, the flow of your product in your pipeline. Okay, so moving on here, we can see there's a big old spike right there, and this is actually a bogus reading that I put in, but what it's simulating is if we hit a rock. So we have a 0 reading. We need to clean that up. Super easy to do in Survey Manager with the flag spikes tool. That's just this flag here at the top right of the chart. And I have a bunch of different options here. So I can look at my on readings for spikes. I can look at my off readings for spikes. And then there's some correction options. So what the correction options are doing are they're saying, take the reading that falls after and the reading that falls before and give me the average of the two, because the assumption is close interval surveys, these readings are happening super close to each other. Likely it's going to be there right in between the previous and the next reading. In this case, I want to say I have them on more positive than -1, and I'm going to go ahead and search all three of those surveys or those survey segments for where I have an on reading that's more positive than -1. And so it found that spike. You can see it's just a 0 that I put in, and it's offering me a corrected value here. So it took the previous reading, took the next reading, gave me the average. If there were multiple, you would see these little red bars showing up on the chart with all of the different places where you might have spikes that violated your criteria. And it's super easy to fix. So you just put in a comment. So I'll just say DG hit rock and flag it as a spike. and it's going to correct that value, and I'll hit close. And now you can see that spike in my chart is gone. And again, that information is updated so that your chart is updated, your table is updated, but we're retaining that historical information in case you need to go back and see what's been changed. Super helpful tools there. There's really two more tools that I want to talk about. One of them is looking for unended skips. So I think that in the summer, something like this is bound to happen more because it's so hot out. You know, right now it's over 100 degrees in Texas every day. And if I were out on the field, I might forget to end a skip after I cross the road or cross the river. Lon actually spent a decent portion of the last presentation talking about when to use a skip and the different ways based on the mode that you're in. If you are in flag mode or if you're using the chainer, when to use skip lock normal, when to use a gap, and all that information. So that, just like we pull the comments out and create them as icons, we're also pulling out where there's a skip, and we're displaying that on the map. And in this case, we have a huge gap, which is indicating us that there is a problem somewhere here. I can see that my cursor is still following my survey segments, which means there's not really a gap. What's happening is there's an unended skip. And it's not just this gap that tells you that. If you look here at the bottom left corner, the name of the survey file is in red. And if you hover over it, there's a tooltip that indicates that there's a long unended skip. So that's the second way that you can identify that there's an unended skip in your survey. The third way is to go to this tools menu here at the top left and click the show skips button. And that color codes the background of the chart to make it super clear that there's a skip there that doesn't have the end skip. So if we just zoom in, here, you can see that there's a road, and it looks like this could be where they skipped, or at least where the skip started. So if we click this comment, you can see that there's a skip right there at position 11,329. And if we go across the way, there should be another skip over here on the other side of the road, but there isn't one. So what we can do is just right click here, and we will add a comment that says end skip. And now you can see that my survey is out of sync. When I go over and refresh it, Survey Manager is going to pick up that skip was there, and it's going to actually show the skip that occurred, not just put a huge gap in my survey. So it makes that survey continuous. Looks like there's another skip in the survey, but that's fine. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was, and I mentioned earlier, collaborating between the field and the office. It makes sense to upload these day plots while you're in the field if you have an internet connection, so that someone in the office can go and verify those readings. Whenever you have an operator or maybe your boss who's really just tracking progress, they want to see the readings that are occurring on a daily basis. They want to see how far these crews are getting. There are times where you don't necessarily want to share those surveys with anyone until they're ready. So you've gone through and you have removed all the skips, you've removed all the spikes, you've made sure your comments are all in order. Once that's done, that survey is ready to share with your boss or an operator. So there's this button here on the survey segments, or this little toggle here on the survey segments section, that if you click it, it actually is going to share that survey segment with a read-only user who has access to the same survey. So before that switch is toggled, even if a read-only user had access to my survey like our pro company and this unended skip survey, they wouldn't see these survey segments until I click this toggle to share it with them. And this only shares it with read-only users. So specifically, we see it a lot for survey companies that own Survey Manager that are granting operators access to their Survey Manager site. And they want to get everything buttoned up before they share it with the operators. So that's just another way that we collaborate. Those are really the main tools that I wanted to cover today as far as cleaning up a close interval survey. So I'll go ahead and open the floor up to questions. Just like there's no questions just yet. Give you all just a little bit more. Okay, here we go. Looks like the data appeared, so this is from Chris. It looks like the data appeared after you marked the end of your skip. Was it always there and hidden or something? Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So it actually took the chart and it pushed that data far out. So the data wasn't actually hidden at all. It just introduced this gap between the start skip and the unended skip, I guess. And once we corrected that, it shifted everything back over. Thanks for the question, Chris. Okay, Nick asks, can Survey Manager export client-ready reports? If so, what types of reports? That is an excellent question, Nick. That's actually something that we're going to talk about in the next episode of this webinar series. There's so much information there that it's worth having an entire webinar about it. But the answer to that, the short answer is yes. We'll dig into that in excruciating detail in September. I think the main one is going to be our chart PDF. That's where we show the chart PDF of the readings plus a map, and both of those are in sync, and all you do is click a button and it goes ahead and generates a PDF with all that aligned information for you. Thanks for the question, Nick. Any other questions? All right. That wraps up this webinar. Thanks everybody for joining us. Be sure to join us in September for the next installment of the series, Speed Up Your Survey Data Reporting with Survey Manager and PCS. Have a great day.